Chapter 291. I'm sure we can come to an agreement. The Admiral POV. We, the representatives of Sea Breeze Merchant House, would like to meet with the leader of New Norfolk. Do you know where they are so we can discuss future cooperation? The bluish-green human was looking for him, and he didn't know why. After being swamped, the merchants had cleared a path and split up to go in different directions. The Admiral knew from their dress and insignias that they were all not of the same faction, which made them splitting up unsurprising. It was just that he didn't understand why. The small group with mountain emblems and a coloring of rich browns went off to the east where he knew the leader of Mountainside lay. The Grass Sea Trading Group went off to where the Heartlands Alliance lay. And now, the Sea Breeze Merchant House was looking for him, when his city was located conveniently on the coastline. The Admiral didn't immediately go out to meet with the alien but tried to think through what had just happened. So much had happened he wasn't exactly ready for another bombshell to be dropped so soon. Like alien merchants being teleported in. "Sir," an advisor came up to him. "The volunteer has come back and said that they can re-enter any time they wish until the timer is up." Perfect. Some good news finally. No one was sure if first entering the reward space would be a one-time thing or not. This way they could find out what these first trading rights were and if the merchants were telling the truth. "Do we have the information yet?" the Admiral asked. "We do." The same advisor handed over a red tome titled, "Merchant Connections to the Newly Integrated." The researchers have already parsed through it and haven't located any falsities. It doesn't hold that much specific information and is more general. But from what we gathered, the merchants were truthful. "So they truly are here in a pure capitalist intent?" the Admiral asked. "From what we can gather, yes." "Does the book hold anything else I should know?" the Admiral asked. He didn't have the time nor the skills to read the book right now. He would eventually, but he had a lot more pressing concerns to deal with in the next 24 hours. One other thing of note is first trading rights are usually purchased by a single merchant group or trading house through a bid of some sort. It seems like the ones we got are a conglomerate of many smaller trading houses pooling together. The advisor said. "So they're separate, but technically working together?" he asked. "Yes." He thought for a moment before nodding. "All right, send him in." The Admiral had been briefed by economic advisors on how to handle this meeting already and daylight was wasting. The slender, off-colored human soon entered into the tent set aside for diplomatic meetings. The man looked like a normal human proportion-wise. A bit on the shorter side but had everything else normal. 2 arms and legs. 2 eyes and 1 nose. Everything except for his color and his eyes were normal. Both were clearly otherworldly. "Hello, I am Trevelyan, merchant head of the Sea Breeze Merchant House sent here. It's a pleasure to meet you." Either through research ahead of time or some other reason, he stuck out his hand in a normal handshake greeting. The Admiral wasn't thrilled to touch hands but had to anyway. Poison is both easier and harder to deal with. With stats, skills, and possible alterations, the threat of poison could be diminished, not to mention healing skills. The flip side to that was with professions, skills, and otherworldly plants and animals, poison could be insanely more deadly. It was a toss-up. The Admiral didn't like toss-ups. "You may call me the Admiral," he answered. "I've heard you've been looking for me." "Correct." Trevelyan nodded. "As you know, without the ability to set up our own civilization pylons, we must rely on those run by natives for access to amenities and protection. And you want to use mine?" the Admiral surmised. "Am I supposed to think choosing my city, which sits on the coast, is a coincidence?" Trevelyan shook his head. "It is not a coincidence. You have the highest leveled pylon that matches our specialty. It is obvious why your city was chosen, just like why the Frost Rose Emporium only has one choice." He wanted to say, "And if I say no?" But he guessed what the answer to that would be. He also didn't want to come off as instantly hostile either. There were too many unknowns for him to feel comfortable inviting in otherworlders, but he didn't have a choice. He could either say yes and gain whatever benefits he could, or they would find someone else who would. "How would this agreement work?" the Admiral asked instead. "I won't allow you to undercut our industries." They possibly had entire cities or planets to call on for supplies, and with that kind of ability, There would be no way the barely rebuilt industries of Earth would be able to compete. If that happened, all manner of resources and coins would be sucked out and transferred to wherever these aliens called home. The opportunity to build wealth would be a lot harder, near impossible. You don't have to worry about that, Trevelyan said. Anything produced locally will be much more affordable than what we can provide. Unless it's wildly overpriced, of course. The Admiral was skeptical. You've used the pylon shop, yes? Trevelyan asked. You know how expensive it costs to buy things from far away? Yes, I do, he answered. It was the only reason traders still formed caravans and built ships. It was cheaper to move the goods manually than to buy through the shop. Moving supplies from planet to planet is exorbitantly expensive, Trevelyan said. The transfer costs alone will make anything you produce locally much cheaper by a significant margin. To undercut you, we would have to sell at a massive loss when there is no need to do so. All right, he said slowly. What would future cooperation entail? That part is rather simple, Trevelyan said. We asked to be allowed to construct a trading hall inside your city, preferably in the inner city, but that part is more preference than requirement, and protected from outside threats. Additionally, we asked to be linked to your civilization pylon so that our shop can house market terminals. In doing so, we will be subject to any taxes you set and allow you first refusal to match any offer on any outside goods we bring in and sell. Is this an elaborate spying operation? Are they reporting back what we do and what we make? How strong we are and how large our military is? It was hard not to think about the possibilities as they were woefully ignorant of what was even possible. I will need to think about this, he said. This wasn't something he would be able to decide right now, let alone by himself. While he was in charge, this wasn't his area of expertise. That's perfectly understandable, Trevelyan said cheerfully. You may call for me when you wish to speak again. They said pleasant goodbyes, and after the man left, the Admiral slumped back into his seat. Not only do I have to prepare for war, but now I need to consider aliens as well. What has my life turned into? Every strategic advisor or long-term military man he had in his chain of command knew that war was imminent. The blow everyone received and the massive losses from the test only delayed the inevitable. War between factions was coming and he needed to be ready. Not only that, but future tests loomed. It'd be years until those came to the forefront, but based on how bad this one was, they needed to prepare earlier rather than later. He sighed deeply. An aide came in to pull him away from his thoughts. Sir, a Christopher Zelensky is here to see you. Luckily, they were trained and knew him well enough that he didn't even have to ask for the intelligence report they had on the man as it was already being handed to him. Christopher Zelensky, designation, Iceman, faction, Frostheim, faction leader, title Baron, class, heavy warrior variant, profession, unknown, level 100, highest stat, strength estate 1500 plus, laws, ice tier 2. Wind Tier 2. Mana Cultivation. Stage 1. Body Stone. Spirit. Anchor Formation. A heavily armored warrior using a large warhammer. Layer of ice as well as plate underneath. Creates a domain of ice around him that debilitates anything close. Categorization. Extremely high strength and high defense warrior. Threat level. Extremely high. There had been some changes from the one he first read about the man. Most were clarifications or edits where they were unsure, but one change did stand out. Threat level, extremely high. It used to only be high. There were only a few others they had knowledge of that were evaluated to have an extremely high threat level. After reading through what they had on the man and putting away the paper, he nodded. Send him in. The Admiral wasn't excited to have a meeting right after the alien and wished to discuss with his advisors what they should do. But he also needed to know what the man wanted. Spurning him now was not a good decision, especially with a threat level like that. The man who walked in was much different than who he remembered seeing at the gathering. The man then was covered in nice furs, stood confidently, and mainly just observed. The man now was dressed more moderately in soft leathers. He still held a confidence to him, but it was hidden behind a tiredness he didn't have before, and it was obvious he was still nursing wounds. The Admiral knew the feeling as he too wished to sleep and see a healer. The warhammer the intel said he wielded was missing and he instead had 2 axes on his belt. I'm surprised they allowed him to walk in with them. Weapons of those who came to visit were supposed to be left outside the tent. Christopher, it's nice to formally meet you, the Admiral said, and they shook. His hands were rough but firm. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, Christopher said in response after the handshake. The Admiral or just Admiral is fine. He'd been going by it for so long that it felt like his name by this point. If that is what you insist, but I'd prefer to call you by name, Christopher said. The man was much larger than the previous alien and filled out the chair much more. Wallace, the Admiral said finally. It was his last name, but it was what he'd gone by for most of his military career. His first name felt odd to be referred to by. Nice to meet you, Wallace. He said sincerely. I've come for a few reasons. Straight to the point. All right then. I've met with other faction leaders before leaving to purchase things that my city does not have, and now I've come to you. I can't help but notice the advancements you've made in combining our old technology with magic, and have come to see if you're willing to sell any of it. Is he talking about guns? Or just the electronic devices we've recovered? Through research, they'd been able to replace electric light bulbs with magic-powered ones instead. From everyone else using torches and fire for light at night, the Admiral knew they were ahead of the curve. They'd attempted to get radios working again, but nothing they'd tried had worked. The interference mana provided shortened the range, dramatically making them mainly useless, and if they did work, the static was unbearable. There was also an issue with someone of sufficient strength causing problems. Scientists believed strong auras could also interfere with the radio waves. Advanced computers were also something they still hadn't worked out yet, but more simplistic ones were already being tested. Guns, though, were where most of their efforts lay. Artillery and cannons were something they wanted to outfit their cities and ships with before any wars kicked off, and the Admiral was not interested in giving them away. That depends on what it is you're looking for, the Admiral said. I won't sell you arms if that's what you want, no matter how much you offer. I don't want your guns. The lights and other similar devices are what I'm after. Not weapons. Christopher shook his head. Also, the formation you use to communicate long distances would help us tremendously, as well as ship designs that can withstand aquatic beasts. How does he know about the formation? At first, the Admiral was taken aback by how openly he asked for things. He didn't veil his words or hide anything, he just came right out and said it. Which was odd. Plus, he just gave up how much he knew. The communication formation was supposed to be a highly kept secret, yet the man obviously knew about it and asked for it openly. Frostheim's intelligence network is advanced. They'd have to make a note of that for the future. Is he hiding more? Did he openly state it to throw me off and assume that was all? And what are you offering for such knowledge? The Admiral asked slowly, still debating in his head whether the man was toying with him. These, Christopher appended a small pouch he took from his belt, and blue-tinted small crystals tumbled out and onto the table. Mana crystals. They were used for power in almost everything they'd built and were extremely expensive. Any they could get their hands on were either being used to power what they had already built or used in research. The Admiral tried to keep his want for them concealed. Maybe he already knows how much we need them. I'm sure we can come to an agreement, he said. Guns were off the table, but everything else didn't matter that much, especially if they were getting mana crystals in return. Chapter 292. In Accord. Chris POV. Wallace looked at the crystals blankly, which was odd considering they were supposed to be rare. Everyone else I talked to showed wanting and greedy faces when I flashed them before. They knew they were valuable. Gear, enchantments, powering pretty much anything that ran on mana, but most importantly, expedited growth of dungeons. That was what we mostly used them for, followed closely by powering formations. I wonder how many floors our dungeons will have by the time we make it back. Still, the man only looked at what I poured on the table before turning his eyes back to me. Magic technology, our communication formation, and ship blueprints, and in return, you will give us mana crystals. Correct, I said. You will have to agree to not use the ships we give you the blueprints for against us. I will not give you the means to attack us without assurances, he said. I agree to not use the ships we build from your blueprints to aggress upon you or yours, I said. It was a simple ask and one I was expecting. If he was so paranoid about not selling us weapons, a stipulation to not use the ships against him was obvious. All right, 50 kilograms of mana crystals in return, he offered. 50? That's insane. 20, I countered. 45. 25. Split the difference, 35. That's the lowest I'll go. While it's not weaponry, it is still valued technology, he said and leaned forward in his chair. I wanted to get him to go lower, but I really wanted the deal. 35 kilograms was a lot, nearly as much as we pulled out from the mine in 2 months. There was a lot involved in separating out dirt and rock from crystals, and some were too small or impure to use. Those instead got ground up to use on crafting. The mana dust was a good, low-grade way to improve material grades. Plus, we had to be careful not to damage any of them while excavating and reduce the quality. There was a lot more to do than just swing a pickaxe and pick up the excavated crystals. Our output wasn't always so high either. To ramp up and get the ball running, the efficiency was a lot worse at the start, and we only got to that number after a year of effort. It's a one-time deal. I get what I want for a bit more, not the end of the world. Fine, I said. 35 kilograms of mana crystals in return for all research on magical technology outside of weapons, the study notes and completed communication formation, and seaworthy ship blueprints. I stuck out my hand for the man to shake, but he didn't. I'll have someone draw up the contract, he said instead, and looked happier than at the start. I frowned. There is no need for that. Let's shake on it and call it good. I did not want to sign anything, and it wasn't just because a verbal agreement was the same as a contract in my eyes. Shaking on it and signing on it were the same. At least to me. While he may not think the same and wish for something in writing, I was skeptical of contracts. Some had explored them that I knew, former lawyers and the like who used to deal in them, but I always found them distasteful. It wasn't a new feeling, as I'd always felt that way even before. If I had to take a microscope to something while also have other people review it just in case of some small print, that was predatory. A handshake and someone's word was how I liked doing things then, and how I liked doing them now. If I got screwed, and someone went back on an agreement, I knew they couldn't be trusted in the future. A small loss at the time, but valuable information to find out. There was also the worry of contract equality. There were so many ways the author of a contract could hide, veil, trick, or mislead in wording that I refused to sign anything, especially when I didn't know the consequences. If you broke a contract before, you went to court and were sued. I had no idea what breaking a contract resulted in now, and I wasn't ashamed to say that scared me. It won't take that long. Skills make everything much more efficient, Fitzwallace said, thinking I was wary of how long it would take. I am not worried about time, I said. As a rule, I do not sign anything. The Admiral shifted in his seat. He looked uncomfortable making a deal without something in writing, while I was the opposite. Is this a deal breaker? I do not know you, and no offense, I do not trust you. I wasn't offended. I felt the same way. It is. You will have to take me at my word, or not at all. May have been a touch firm with how I said it, but it was how I felt. He turned thoughtful, and I had no doubt he was going over it in his head. The deal was mainly a one-time thing, as we handed over the crystals and he handed over the information. The only lasting thing a contract could instill was to not use the ships against him. While that was variably the most important part to him, that didn't even register to me. I didn't care about what he did, and I sure as hell wasn't going to cross the continent to wage war on him. It would take months to get to New Norfolk, let alone going through plenty of other factions before getting there. That distance wasn't so easily crossed. I could see him weighing the options, seeing if trusting me was worth it, but he looked down at the table for some reason, or maybe something under the table, I wasn't sure, and nodded his head. I do not like it, but I will do it, he concluded. Good. He finally shook my hand, and I couldn't help but allow a smile to form. This was the last deal I had to make. Now all that was left was to meet back up with Abigail, discuss what we would choose for our rewards, and then head back home. Leaving the Admiral's camp, I couldn't help but think about what I could have done better. Jonathan had tried to give me pointers for the negotiation, but there was only so much he could help. I wanted to leave it all to him, as he was much better at it than me, but for first meetings it was more diplomacy than anything, which required me the faction leader. Subsequent deals would be all him though. There was no way I was doing that forever. Maybe I shouldn't have let him negotiate the amount in weight. Forcing an evaluation and negotiating in gold would have been better. Oh well. It was over and that was that. It was nice to be returning back to our camp instead of heading off toward another stiff meeting with another faction. The meetings didn't make me nervous, but they did make me consider what I said carefully and make sure to not cause any problems. Most of the factions here I didn't give one shit about, but those weren't the factions I was meeting with. Besides the Admiral, the factions I met with were all close enough to Frostheim that if something went horribly wrong, distance wouldn't save us. I doubted someone from Texas or Louisiana would march all the way north to where we were. The trip alone would be more than a year. Ah, Chris, you're back. Austin was looking better after seeing a healer, but it would still be a while until the missing arm stopped sticking out. My mind wanted to see too, and that difference was hard to ignore. How did it go? As well as it could, I said, and let some of the tension go. Most were easy enough, but our treasury we brought with us is nearly gone, and so is the crystals. That bad? You really need to leave things to Jonathan. He snarked. Oh, hop off. I didn't do that bad. I wanted to shove him, but I stopped. You're lucky you're crippled. Ha! Never heard that one before. I wonder how long that will last. He laughed deprecatingly. You know I can still stab you, right? One arm or two. I chuckled. Do you think it'll mess up my evolution? After picking my reward, I'll be ready. He asked, and his stump wagged in the air. I don't know. It might, but I don't know that much. What does the evolution process actually do? I asked. He gave me a look. How should I know? We've got a parental lock on us for the weirdest things. Maybe we can ask the aliens. They should know. I responded. But I would wait, just to be safe. Yay, lucky me. He sighed. At least it won't be as long as you. Most of my arm is still there and I don't have as high a fortitude. Plus, the healer's got a massive amount of levels dealing with everything. That's good, man. Did you talk to Marcus? I asked. Yeah, he's up for it. There were some things that he wanted to get personally, but other than that, he's keen on the idea. Abigail and Grace are already coordinating with him. Austin said. Good. I nodded. And what about Jonathan? Did he get with the merchants? He did. Austin muffled a smirk. There were some things that they won't be able to get, but most things that we need just come down to price. You won't like how expensive it is. More energy left me just thinking about it. Don't I know it? Also, one of them is here to meet you. He said it nonchalantly, like that wasn't the most important piece of information. Really? Why are you only saying so now? To fuck with you, he said with a straight face. He hasn't been here long and we told him you weren't here. He seemed fine to wait. Which one is it? It's one of the blue ones, he said. Platinum white hair and pointy ears. If it ain't an elf, then Tolkien isn't a wizard. Feels kinda like you. Maybe referring to them as one of the blue ones wasn't the best. Where is he? I asked. Meeting one of the foreign merchants wasn't something I wished to do right this second, but I couldn't very well keep him waiting either. Waiting in your tent. Someday, Austin. My urge to strangle you will win. Ah, that's cute. You think you can catch me. I ignored his last comment and walked off in the direction of my tent. While annoying, the conversation with Austin only took a few moments. That delay wasn't anything significant in the long run. Before entering, I gave myself a once-over to make sure nothing was out of place. Even though I'd done not long ago before meeting with the Admiral, I couldn't help but make sure. It's just an elf which I've never seen before, from a totally different planet. What's there to be nervous about? With my pep talk, I entered my own tent. The elf looked exactly how Austin described. White hair, blue-tinted skin, and pointy ears sticking out from his head. He was dressed in a blue robe that had white accents on the hems. His hair was also pulled back and braided finely, making him seem all around more fancy. Or maybe that was just my imagination. I'm sorry for the wait. I'm Christopher Zelensky. Nice to meet you. I introduced myself. His hands were cold, which was odd. Since my body refining and bloodline, most people felt hot when I touched them, not cold. The pleasure is mine, thank you. My name is Volwyn Zilris, head merchant of the Frost Rose Emporium dispatched to this continent. The elf said with a smile. This continent? I'm sure you may have seen the other merchant groups seeking out factions to meet, so this shouldn't come as a surprise to you. He continued. I had noticed that while walking around to my various meetings, but I hadn't known what it was about. It seemed like I was about to. Without the ability to own our own pylon, we must come to an agreement with a faction who does. Preferably a high-level one to establish a base of operations, if you may. He said. And you wish to make a deal with mine? I asked. The elf nodded. I do. You may have guessed already, but all the merchants here have their own specialties. The Grass Sea Trading Group deals mainly in nature or grass affinity goods and bloodlines commonly found in the Great Plains. Nine Rivers deals in freshwater aquatic goods. And we, the Frost Rose Emporium, deal in all things Arctic. We hadn't known the names of the different merchant groups, but we did know they weren't all together. The different dress, colors, and segmented way they didn't stand in a group made that much obvious. That being the case, your faction, being the furthest north and closest to the lands of Everwinter, is the obvious choice for us to settle. The elf continued. I'd just gotten out of a half-dozen meetings and no one had been as forward as him. Well, except for myself, but that didn't count. Aren't you tipping your hand there? If I knew he wanted to settle in my city over others, I'd have the advantage. Not really. While your city suits us best, our merchant group suits you best. Unless you want to invite the Sea Breeze, which I doubt. The Souring Phoenix Guild won't even go that far north. He shrugged, knowing that we were both in the same position. He's got me there. What are you asking for in return for setting up in my city? I asked. It would make everything a lot easier having one of the groups settle in Frostheim. Materials and goods we couldn't get access to being available. Techniques and skills we'd been looking for. Everything we didn't already have. It would be extremely expensive, but it was still better than being unavailable. Having ready access to outside merchants was a boon in my book, and I was surprised people weren't fighting over each other offering different things to get them to pick their city. Maybe pylon level has something to do with it. If the elf didn't ask for anything ridiculous, I was inclined to agree. We ask that you protect us from settlement waves and to be given a plot of favorable land near a market. After we construct a branch of the Emporium, we ask you to permit us to link it to your civilization pylon so that we can set up shop terminals. The elf listed off his demands, all of which were rather reasonable. We already protected the city during the waves. Giving him a plot of land would cause Abigail to move some things around, but not that bad, and we'd already been trying to get Jonathan to set up terminals. They allowed access to the pylon shop without having to physically touch the pylon. We were disinclined to allow lines of people into our castle to buy things. We usually made them go through Jonathan or one of the other merchants. Terminals outside the castle would make everything easier. Someone like Tracy would love to restrict access to control what could be bought, but I didn't care all that much. That much control over a population would only end badly. That's it. I caught myself saying it before I could stop. Yes, that's it. Since we will be within the confines of your pylon, we will be subject to whatever taxes and laws you set. The elf seemed pleased. Even cash transactions? I asked. Transactions through the pylon and the wallet function of the status sheet were already automatically subject to our taxes. It was when people used physical coins or bartered that taxes had to be taken out manually. We asked the merchant to keep track and hand over the percentage, but we still didn't have any way to confirm we were getting all of it. Eventually, we'd set something up to audit them, but our manpower was better spent elsewhere currently. Cash transactions? The elf asked, confused. I'm not sure what that means. While translation skills are great, there are times when nuance is lost. When someone pays with the physical coin instead of through the system. I clarified. Talking had been normal, I honestly forgot it was being translated. Oh, I understand. Yes, we must follow all local taxes, even those not done through the great system. The elf said. It's part of the contract we sign. Then I see no reason to refuse. I said, you will need to speak with Abigail for the plot and Jonathan about the terminal. Though, I don't keep a map on me. We are in agreement then? The elf asked. Yes, we are. Perfect. Now that we are in accord, our travel north will be a lot safer. How long do you estimate it will take to get there? Volwyn was rather chipper now that we settled things and seemed excited to get to work. I almost didn't have the heart to break it to him, but I had to. Chapter 293. It's been a long day. Chris POV. No rest for the wicked. My body ached, my mind was tired, and there was a dull buzzing in the back of my head it felt like, but I still couldn't lay down to rest. Hell, I still hadn't been to a healer yet, as I had instead hurried out to meet with other leaders straight away. I'd been worried they would take off before I had the chance to speak with them, making everything all that much harder. Now that an agreement was already in place, all I had to do was send representatives out to pick up what we bought and drop off our payment. Instead of me going on over month-long trips to each and every pylon, which would have been an absolute bitch. Instead, all I had to do was travel half the continent, fight orcs, and meet everyone here. In the long run, I didn't know which would have been easier. Hop to, Christopher, almost done, I said to myself. At least the next task is fun. Picking out rewards and finally getting access to things we had been barred from was exciting. It reminded us that we were barred from it in the first place, which was annoying, but it also had the shiny effect. The new and shiny effect. I already had a few ideas for what I'd spend my personal rewards on, but those for the faction were a little more nebulous. The options were nearly endless. We could get really good equipment now and be one of the most well-equipped armies around, but we would eventually grow out of such equipment. We could also go all in for the future and leave ourselves at a disadvantage if any fights broke out against a faction who had done the opposite. It wasn't so bad that I'd say war was in the air, but it was written on the walls. Maybe not this year or maybe next year, but it was coming. I poked my head into the planning tent to see a flurry of activity. Abigail, Sophia, Grace, and Jonathan were all going through sheets of paper, combing over lists with numbers next to them. There were so many it surprised me initially. I hadn't thought we brought this much paper with us. How goes it? I tried to sound upbeat, but they all just gave me the stink eye. The time to choose was bearing down on them, and they were still going through all the options. It looked like Abigail's perfectionist need had rubbed off on all of them. Fine, Abigail said tersely. We're still compiling the lists and won't be done for a while. That's fine, I said. I just wanted to check and see where we were. I picked up one of the papers that sat atop a pile off to the side. I assumed that whatever it pertained to was finished for the time being. Raw materials, deep iron, frost steel, flow steel, compressed granite. The list was, as the title described, a collection of various raw materials. Unexpectedly, there were numbers next to them that I had to assume were prices. How do you know how much these cost? I asked. Had she remembered how much they were in the tutorial store? That was 2 years ago. How is that possible? They could have changed. You can enter the reward shop as many times as you want while the timer is still active. We had people going back and forth to compile everything. It's what's taking the longest, Abigail said without looking up. Why are you even bothering with some of this? I looked at a different list of mainly mundane materials. Oak planks? Pine logs? We have this in Frostheim. The exclusion of data just because it's irrelevant now does not mean it will stay that way. Even if this isn't precise to our specific market, it gives us a starting point for how much these things cost. She rattled off addedly, still not looking up. Then, having a sudden thought and jerking her head up, Chris, I need you to go and see how many faction points we have. She commanded like we were still on the battlefield. Did she just realize it was me and not someone else? Can't you see it? You're the city lord of our faction, I asked. She was also set to inherit the leader title if I were to fall, but I kept that part to myself. I hadn't known that was possible until I was playing around with the pylon. She also didn't know I'd done that. No, only the faction leader can see or use the faction's points. She said angrily. It's bullshit, but it'll have to do. All right, Do I just pop in to see how many points we have to spend and come right back? I asked. Yes, and check how many personal points you have as well. She responded. Gee, thanks, Captain Obvious. Pulling up the notification, I tried to look for a way to enter the reward store but came up empty. I thought I'd be like after the tutorial ended and I would get whisked off, but that didn't seem to be the case. I had to think about entering, and the next thing I knew, I was back in the absurdly white room with a familiar guide. The only difference was I didn't feel any teleportation. The usual discombobulation was absent and it felt near seamless. Congratulations, human. You have passed the E-Rank Planetary Protections Assessment and have fought for your planet. For accomplishing that feat, rewards will be given based upon your performance. As the leader of a faction who also participated, separate rewards have also been earned. The guide's words were nearly identical to the last time I was here in all their robotic, lifeless glory. You may see how many E-Rank assessment reward points you have by opening the shop menu. If you have any questions or need help to aid your search, you may query me by voicing your concern. This being my third time meeting the guide, I brought up the shop menu to see how many points I had immediately. Dear God, I said breathlessly, that's a lot. 115,854,235 personal points. 592,621,667 faction points. Those numbers meant nothing by themselves and were a lot less than how many tutorial reward points I left with, but I knew it was more significant than that. The values of what we could purchase had changed as well. Why the difference? To be more precise, during the tutorial? Plus, that was 30 days versus one battle. It was times like these that I wished we were given more information. Knowing how many points per orc killed was also a nice thing to know but was withheld. Still, just from glancing at the raw materials costs on the piece of paper, I knew we had a lot of purchasing power. If all we spent our points on was condensed granite, we'd be able to build a massive citadel reaching into the sky and still have points left over. I poked around a bit in the catalog, but I didn't plan to stay for long. I just wanted to see how much a few things I prepared to purchase cost. I wish I hadn't. It made me want to cry. Why are frost giant parts so expensive? Leaving the shop a touch more humble than first entering, I felt nothing as my vision returned to the same tent I'd been in. Creepy. Abigail was alarmingly close and the sheer demand on her face was worrying. And? How many? 592,621,667. Good. All right, that's good, she said while backing away. Good. Really good. She was acting weird. I looked to Jonathan for help. I think you broke her, he said unhelpfully. How? All I did was tell her what she asked for, I said. Jonathan shook his head. We've been here for hours trying to plan around a budget of 200 or 300 million. Now you come and say we have nearly double that available. How would you know how much to plan for? Well, Jonathan shrugged. The scouts hear things and Marcus already told us how many he has. It was a simple deduction from there. The amount of faction points is the sum of all the members' personal points, so we extrapolated. How many did Marcus have? I asked. Around 450 million, but he had more people than us. We only had 800 while he had well over 1,000. Jonathan answered. Wait, I said. Faction points are just everyone's personal points added up? That seemed wrong. My personal points were a fifth of the faction points. If that were true, that meant that I alone accounted for a fifth of our contribution. That didn't seem right. We had over 800 people fighting. Yeah, we haven't done the exact math, as some people don't wish to reveal how many points they got. But the sample size was big enough for us to say with confidence that was the case. He said, How many points did you get? I asked. Just under 50 million, he said with a touch of pride. Oh, don't say it. I don't want to know. He cut me off. I know you got more and let's leave it at that. Abigail already beat me and I don't feel like asking Austin or Rachel. My pride can only take so much. Abigail got more? Good for her. Abigail's mind took a moment to digest how many more points we had than she expected, but she was back quickly. All right. Good. We won't have to compromise as much. We still need to rank which skill orbs, techniques, and knowledge is most important, but now we won't have to be as selective. I was most excited about the skill orbs, personally. They weren't going to be as powerful as my class skills, but they would round out the skills I had available. Gabriel would like them too, as he took the chance to study every skill shard we pulled out of the dungeons before someone used it. Jonathan, how did it go with the merchants? Austin said things will be expensive but available. I asked. Well, not exactly. He started. We'll be able to buy most things, but some of the prices make it unfeasible. Any technique above the basic level is absurdly expensive and isn't worth the expense. It's better to buy them now rather than through the merchants. Also, there are certain restrictions on some of the parts one tried to look into. The Dragon Bloodline parts for Rachel, the Fire Titan for Vincent, the Naiad for Abigail, and the Frost Giant for you are among those that are better purchased through the reward store. What restrictions? I didn't like the sound of that. Well, remember when we were told that picking certain bloodlines would complicate things? Jonathan started. I vaguely remembered saying fuck it and doing that exact thing anyway. Well, certain races dislike it when we use their corpses to advance. He finished. I also noticed that the more animalistic bloodlines weren't listed. Jonathan's Stone Turtle, Austin's Radiant Eagle, Gabriel's Arctic Fox. That makes sense. How do we get around that? I questioned. Without finding the parts ourselves in the wild. Well, that part is rather easy. Apparently, there was a massive war a long time ago over it and there was an agreement made. If we want access to restricted parts, the race we hold a bloodline in has the right to test us. Jonathan explained. My anger got the better of me. Fucking Christ. I yelled. How many goddamn tests are we put through? The entire tent turned and looked at me wide-eyed and I realized how loud I shouted. It's not that unreasonable when you think about it, Abigail cut in. It's their race we need access to. Being able to restrict who gets access is well within reason. I sighed. I know that, but all this testing and evaluating and seeing if we're worthy is annoying. I just want to be left alone and tell everyone to fuck off. Thousands just died to prove that we're worthy to have our planet protected. A planet that was perfectly fine before some great system came in and ruined it all. My aura leaked out as my anger did. It brings us into this universe, and then says, hey there, if you don't want to get invaded and possibly enslaved by alien races, you need to fight well and prove worthy of protection, like we're some gladiators thrown into a pit to fight for other people's entertainment. I hadn't meant to yell. I hadn't realized I started raising my voice, but by the end, I was huffing from exertion. I noticed my aura was getting away from me and both Sophia and Grace were shaking. I'm sorry. I reined my aura back in. It's been a long day. Chapter 294 Boned. Chris POV. It took me a second to rein in my outburst and get my aura under control. I hadn't known that was in me, and it came out at a time I hadn't expected. This was also the first time I had so obviously seen the effects I had on people. Grace and Sophia weren't just shaking because my aura made them cold, but because they were scared. There were also people outside the tent that were affected, as the tent didn't have any impact on how my aura spread. Clamping down on my frustrations and taking a calming breath, the work continued. Abigail and Jonathan jumped right back in, but the two assistants had to work themselves back up. I let them get back to it and instead took some time to rest. There were still many hours left on the timer and I didn't have to be in the room for every second. Instead, I finally got to see Ashley so she could patch me up. Probably didn't help my mood that I was still riddled with cuts and blight. The pain was minimal compared to what I'd felt before, but it was still pain. The delayed muscle ache that was beginning to set in was an additional aggravation. It felt like my body had been put through a meat grinder. While Ashley and a few other healers were patching me up, I took a dip into the reward space every once in a while to check things out. There hadn't been a rush the last time when we came out of the tutorial, but there was the worry about returning later than the others that had caused me to rush a bit. Now, I had over 12 hours to explore the catalog to my heart's desire. While the faction points were to be spent on things Abigail and her team came up with, my personal points were mine and mine alone. I'd use some of them on what Abigail told me to, but the lion's share was to be used at my fancy. And I was fancying a lot of things. Knowing I'd have to buy my parts through the reward store was annoying, but not the end of the world. It took out a large chunk of my personal points right away, but I still had enough to feel rich. For the time being, there were a lot of expensive and shiny options that caught the eye. Options that would drain my wallet faster than flies on shit. I may have looked at ways to upgrade my spirit fire more intently than I should. Vincent would no doubt want to do the same, but he hadn't been here. Maybe we should shell in some faction points for him? He is our best smith? Abigail's probably already thought of that. Upgrading my spirit fire admittedly wasn't the best use of my points, but that didn't mean I didn't want to. Crafting had taken a back seat to fighting for as long as the system had inducted us. And while I doubted that would ever change, that didn't mean I regretted not spending more time on it. It wasn't just because of the stat points either. More time spent crafting would upgrade my skills more, increasing my accomplishments, and ending in a rarer profession that would reward more stat points. The line between a rare profession and an epic profession was 48 stat points and 56 stat points. 8 per level didn't sound like much until it was totaled over the 50 levels of E rank. One rarity higher resulted in 400 more stat points. That gap would only get wider as one advanced. 400 raw stat points in one attribute would be a massive difference in a fight, but spread out over all 9 wasn't that large of a difference when someone already had over 1,000 in one stat. Skills, laws, body level, and anchor were more than enough to make up that difference. But if that continued and one person always had a profession 1 rarity higher, that gap would become insurmountable eventually if all else stayed the same. Maybe some weapon blueprints or armor blueprints then. Making a sword was easy enough if all you wanted to do was get the shape right. Long and thin with sharp edges and voila, a sword. There was also a feel to it that one accumulated that made shaping easier. Drawing out the metal just right, flattening it, making sure the balance was right. That all came from effort, feel, and experience. Anyone could imagine what the end product was supposed to be and do their best to create it from that, but blueprints made things easier. It detailed exactly how much metal to be used, the exact dimensions it was supposed to be, the step-by-step process of how to make the item you wished. While not strictly necessary, it made things simpler and easier. Definitely some runes. Expanding my library is a must. I could buy runes from the merchants, but some were rarer than others and the cost reflected that. Basic ones like durability and piercing were common on weapons, which made buying them cheaper. The more esoteric or rare the rune, the more it would cost. After a certain point, it was better to buy them from the reward store. The healers took a long time to patch me up, but they did a fine job. It wasn't perfect, and I still had some of the blight in me, but it was much better than before. It would take a few more sessions to complete, but I already felt a lot better. Now all that was left to do was decide. The options were killing me. All right, are we ready? Abigail couldn't help but ask. 1 hour, 47 minutes and 22 seconds. I glanced at the timer to see how much longer we had and chuckled. Abigail had taken up to the last second to finalize everything and had even gone over her self-imposed limit. She hadn't slept and worked through the night to get everything in order. I had rested and hopped into cold meditation for a few hours, but I was still in need of a good shut-eye. The 2-hour mark was when we were supposed to be ready. It left more than enough time to find and purchase everything while also allowing for some leeway in case anything went wrong. We didn't know if something could go wrong, but Abigail was nothing if not a planner. "I've been ready," Austin commented dryly. The whole family was gathered in our main tent so that whatever we purchased came out together. It would be easier to defend if those with the most points were all in one spot. We also had Elliot and the orders guarding it just in case. Everyone knows what they need to do, Abigail said to herself more than anyone else. "Let's do it!" She was the first to go. I had learned from watching other people why it didn't feel like I was being teleported. It was because we weren't. Our physical bodies stayed put and our mind went somewhere else. Or our spirit. It was still confusing, but our bodies didn't leave. They just took on a distant look and turned deathly still. It was what allowed the healers to work while I explored the store. The others left one by one, and I gave Austin a wink before going off myself. He'd been upset to learn how many more points I had than him. Unlike Jonathan, he wanted to know the specifics. Congratulations, human. You have passed the E-Rank Planetary Protections Assessment and have fought for your planet. For accomplishing that feat, rewards will be given based upon your performance. As the leader of a faction who also participated, separate rewards have also been earned. You may see how many E-Rank assessment reward points you have by opening the shop menu. If you have any questions or need help to aid your search, you may query me by voicing your concern. The guide said the same thing every time I entered the reward store space, and it was getting a touch old by now. If it had been a human, I'd have felt bad for making it repeat itself so many times. Alright, let's begin the shopping spree. First on the list, evolution parts. Stingy system and stupid tests and deep breath. Don't go down that rabbit hole again. Show me body parts of beings from the Frost Giant bloodline. The catalog shuffled around and came up with what I had asked for. There was a lot available still. Hearts, livers, kidneys, brains, blood, bones, muscles, tendons, the whole kit and caboodle. It wasn't only for one race either. I had asked for all those in the Frost Giant bloodline, and that was what it gave me. Even if it was entirely out of my price range and cost more points than I had in total, it still showed parts from a true Frost Giant. There were various options for where I could go with my evolution. For my first, I'd chosen the heart of a lesser Frost Giant. A young one at that. The lineage of my bloodline went Frost-touched, Frostborn, Jotun, Lesser Frost Giant, then Frost Giant. Taking in the heart of a lesser Frost Giant was 2 tiers above my own at the time and was mildly risky. I'd trusted in my stats and body refining to deal with it, but there was also the fact it was only a heart. It was small. Well, comparatively small. The amount of material to incorporate, while potent and dense, was restricted to the size of the organ. If I chose to use the nervous system or the skeletal system, that was a lot more material than only a heart, and that large of a difference in tier mattered a lot more. If I decided on something smaller, like the lungs or another singular organ, I could push things a bit more. Every evolution I could push a bit further. A bit more could change. This evolution would be able to do more than the previous. It would also reinforce what was already changed. Every change was built upon what was already there to begin with. Of all the options, there was only one that made sense to me. I could go with muscles and become much stronger, and I already had the heart to feed them, but that was putting the cart before the horse. It was the bones that were more important. Strength meant nothing if my body couldn't handle it. Using the bones would fortify and strengthen my body so that when my next evolution came, the muscles wouldn't tear off or cause problems for myself. That being the case, needing an entire skeletal structure, I couldn't use too powerful of materials. Anything above Lesser Frost Giant was right out, and even using Lesser Frost Giant was pushing it. Jotun Bones was already a step up. Do I or don't I? Eliminate everything under Jotun tier and above Lesser Frost Giant tier. Restrict it to full skeletons as well. As the list shortened, the 2 results I expected to see weren't the only ones that appeared. There were a lot more left to choose from than I expected. Why are there more than 2? I asked. The guide answered in its unnatural voice. Within your parameters, there are still many options. Age, level, amount of essence dedicated to fortitude, and body level all play a role in the strength of the bones. Oh shit, I hadn't even thought of that. Is it better to go for a powerful Jotun with a body of stone or higher, or a weak Lesser Frost Giant? Even thinking about using a Lesser Frost Giant was risky. Using one that was more powerful than base was out of the question. I wasn't about to explode myself by reaching too far. Taking a deeper look at the options and digging into the descriptions more, it revealed one of the Jotun skeletons had a body of stone that focused on durability. It had reinforced the bones with glacial mana to make them stronger and more durable. It sounded like a specific body refining technique that then left the bones with specific qualities. Just as there were numerous techniques, there were plenty of different options of bones to choose from. One bone structure focused on circulating mana. One was used to regulate temperature. One for flexibility. One for... Thank God we allocated a couple of hours for this. I assumed there would only be a few options. Chapter 295, Personal Points. Chris POV. I feel like specialized, strengthened Jotun bones are better than unspecialized higher-tier lesser frost giant bones. The benefits of what I was choosing gave me more control if I went with Jotun bones, and I liked that aspect about it. I got to handpick which aspect I wanted instead of going with higher tier, yet more generic. The lesser frost giant bones would have been a big boost, too. If I could handle it and not blow myself up, but that was assuming I could. They also didn't have any body refining done, so I couldn't select the unique qualities that I wanted. Show only Jotun bones with a body of stone or higher. If I pick a conflicting aspect from a body refining technique now, will it interfere when I refine my own body later? We assimilated the parts during our evolutions, so I wasn't sure if later body refinings would mess with things. My heart didn't interfere much when I underwent body of stone, other than healing me from the cold and making everything take longer because my natural vitality increased. But it hadn't conflicted with anything. Nearly all the options were cold-aligned of some sort. It wasn't a surprise that Jotuns, being of the frost giant bloodline, favored cold alignments. The issue I saw is where some leaned ice earth, rather than ice wind like I did. Tundra of permafrost, for example. Best not to muddle my affinity. It was possible to acquire multiple separate affinities, but I didn't think this was the way to do that. It was best to leave the earth-tinted ones out and focus on either pure ice or ice and wind like I was already doing. Show only Jotun bones with unaligned affinity, pure ice, or ice and wind. The list narrowed, but it was still long enough I had options. Instead of narrowing it further, I gazed through it to see what was there. Peak E-rank adult Jotun bones. Unique quality, glacial strength, body of copper, fortitude essence, 2000. Price, 35 million. Early D-rank adult Jotun bones. Unique quality, rapid regeneration, body of stone, fortitude essence, 1500. Price, 29 million. Mid D-rank elder Jotun bones. Unique quality, Arctic rejuvenation, body of stone, fortitude essence, 1750. Price, 45 million. If I wanted to, I could look further into what each of the options meant, allowing me to get more information. Glacial strength was obvious, but rapid regeneration was less intuitive along with Arctic rejuvenation. Rapid regeneration worked through ice mana to refreeze bones back together if they were ever to get broken. It wasn't a perfect fix from what I could tell, but it got the job done and allowed a person to fight on. Arctic rejuvenation worked to feed Arctic mana into the bone marrow to boost healing and vitality depending on the amount and purity of mana. I pictured it as an inbuilt healing skill. Another thing to make note of was the price. I had 115 million at my disposal, and the bones were ranging from 30 to 45 million right off the bat. Based on price, elder bones were prized more than the third level of body refining. Even though the E-rank Jotun had a body of copper one step above stone, it was cheaper than the elder bones. They were also more expensive than the early D-rank bones. Rank is less important than fortitude and body, but age is more important than both. Even though deeper in the list made prices soar, I couldn't help but keep looking further and further down. If I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. My body technique boosts the durability against slashing and cutting attacks. Which one would work best with that? Flat durability and strength? Regeneration after breaking? Vitality boost? Blunt attack protection? Or something other than strictly for bones? Mana circulation? Flexibility? Temperature regulation? There were also less desirable traits. One allowed ice spikes to extend out of joints. One froze the body rigid for some reason. Another was strictly for growth, allowing one to gigantify if I was reading things right. Having bones that could circulate mana in addition to my blood would add a second avenue for it, but how would my mana heart work with that? My mana pool had been moved and transformed into my heart, which was where my mana came from. How would it then transfer into my bones? Flexibility sounded like it would make me more nimble. It would also make breaking my bones harder because they would have flex in them, maybe? I wasn't exactly sure. Temperature regulation would be a big help with glacial presence. If my bones helped drop my temperature lower, the boost it gave would be easier to get regardless of the outside temperature. But was it worth it to go for that instead of something else? I mulled over it for a while but kept coming back to one option. It was expensive, near the bottom, but I couldn't help but like it. Mid-Dirank Elder Jotun Bones. Unique quality. Essence of Frost, body of copper. Fortitude Essence, 2500. Bones of an Elder Jotun thrice refined using the same technique. The Essence of Frost technique purifies, concentrates, and distills all cold-aligned mana and energy into the Essence of Frost. Boosts all cold-aligned abilities and skills both inherent or gained, while also providing such essence to nourish and strengthen the rest of the body. Price, 65 million. That option, above all the others, stuck out to me. It reminded me of my mana cultivation technique Stars of Primordial Frost. It sounded like my bones would act as a focus like in Abigail's staff. The runes and beast core used in her staff did similar things to what the description read. That essence would also make strengthening my bloodline easier. It would help Glacial Presence if I could supercharge my domain skills with Frost Essence. Not to mention my newly upgraded Glacial Heavy Plate. The Fortitude level and Age of the Bones would work to flatly increase my durability, even without doubling down on it with the unique quality as well. I was hoping it would increase my body's capability to withstand the boosts I had access to as well. I dilly-dallied enough, time for action. My gut was telling me it was the best option, so I went with it. Without leaving the opportunity to second-guess myself, I purchased it. Without the timer, I'd probably spend hours going over every option. Alright, nearly a half hour on the first reward. Best to speed things up. Identify Freeze, Epic. Blocks all attempts to ascertain information from the skill holder by utilizing one's aura to freeze out scrying, divining, or visual abilities. If the difference in aura strength is significant, it also imparts a freezing ailment to those who try to use identifying skills. My own scouts could read my information through my blocker, and I knew that others at the gathering had as well. I wanted to make sure my level and information were private, and this skill was perfect for that. It also worked based on aura strength instead of perception or something else. Its price was also reasonable. I also purchased the opposing skill. Aura Detection, rare. Uses one's aura to detect and evaluate enemies and items in range. While mainly suited for assessing and identifying other beings, it can also identify materials and objects to a lesser degree. It finally rid me of my awful identify problem by basing the skill on aura instead of my poor perception. When I first poked around in the store, I thought these would be available through the merchants, but I'd been wrong. Higher rarity skills weren't openly sold like I had assumed. Most factions had uses for these, and while they were nothing groundbreaking, they were hard to find for sale. Other skills like dash, charge, and wind manipulation were a lot easier and cheaper to get through merchants, which I was planning to do. It'd be a waste to use personal points on wind manipulation. Now that we had access to common skills easily, I was looking to bank up on some to even out my skill set. While we were given 6 skills per rank, we also had room for more. The last of the 3 skills I planned to get was a movement skill. For this, there were a few lesser options available to buy like Snow Walk and Ice Slide, but I wanted a good one and those weren't for sale easily. Glacial March, Epic. Slow in the beginning, but inevitable in the end. While standing on ice, earth, or see your feet push you onward like the steady march of a glacier. Forces seeking to block, slow, or ensnare have a decreased effect until eventually being ground underfoot and thrown off entirely. It was my movement skill of choice. It didn't make me faster or make it easier to dodge. Like Austin's Flash Step, it made any attempts to slow or trap me less effective or ineffective depending on how strong they were. That hadn't been a problem yet, as I mostly fought beasts, but I had a feeling my human battle experience would soon see a rise in action. The biggest thing others were worried about was me getting trapped. This skill would negate that. It wasn't perfect, but it would help. All 3 skills together were a decent chunk of my points, but not nearly as bad as the bones. Next up was my body refining technique. I'd gone through Body of Wood and Body of Stone already. It was time for Body of Copper. It would be after I evolved, but it was good to get it now. Similar to good skills, good techniques weren't sold so easily. Body refining techniques and mana cultivation techniques were a faction's lifeblood. They weren't so freely shared. This was why a considerable amount of our faction points were going to go toward buying some, but that was later. Also, I decided to switch it up. The Northern Wind's body technique had fit me well for the first 2 levels, but I decided to branch out. The increased resistance to cutting attacks had worked well to keep the orcs' axes and swords from slicing into me, as well as beast claws up until that point, but I felt a new road was better than continuing down my old one. My body couldn't handle the boosts my skills provided. I couldn't get any secondary ones from supports or healers either. Those exact skills upgrading and becoming more effective only made it worse, too, which made it even more pressing. Instead of going with the same technique again, I went with the Might of the Arctic technique. Might of the Arctic body refining technique grinds the flesh and bones into fine snow using the full power of the Arctic before rebuilding it in steadier form. Boosts and fortifies the foundation of the body, empowering all that is already there. Additionally, any increase past base limits strains the body less. It went on to describe in brutal detail how it would pulverize every cell with the full weight of the Arctic. From the sounds of it, I was in for a joyous occasion. It would make my current wind chamber obsolete, but I'd have time to build another one or seek out an area in the far north that would work. The wind chamber wouldn't be useless, though, as others had already spent some time experiencing what I had. With my main desires taken care of, there was more leeway with what I wanted next. The bones, skills, and technique took a good portion of my points, but I had enough for one last big purchase before I had to spend the rest on what Abigail told me. It was a little irksome to have to spend some of my points that way, but what we had decided to get as a faction more than made up for it. Faction points were to be spent for the faction, but some of the items would benefit me directly. Spending a few of my personal points to get things that I didn't necessarily need was a small price to pay for that. My last big purchase with my personal points was technically not a dire necessity, but I was tired of being injured all the time. It had happened enough times I was sick of it. One big battle and I'd be recovering for months. Leveling up and increasing the power of our healers was one way to combat that, but it was slow. Another way was through a treasure bed of Centurion ice, chiseled from a 100-year-old glacier and processed by a master ice sculptor. The energies within have been filtered and tuned to boost the rejuvenation of cold bloodlines and Arctic healing. Further, it's been enchanted with runes of healing and rejuvenation to have an even greater effect. My very own bed of healing. Laying on it would make the vitality provided by my heart greater in addition to helping cold meditation. Laying on that while also getting seen by healers would cut down on my downtime significantly. Next, formation and runic enchantment books. Pooling our points was for everyone's benefit. It spread out who bought what but allowed everyone access to it anyway. While I bought formation and runic enchanting books, someone else bought forging books, another bought alchemy books, and yet another bought herbalism books, but we all shared. It was important to note only I had access to faction points while everyone else only had personal points. These things could be bought with faction points, but it was more effective to have everyone spend a small portion of points for the faction than have the faction spend a significant amount of points on everything. It opened us up for bigger and better purchases. It also worked out that it was for everyone's benefit. If dozens of different people were interested in alchemy, instead of everyone spending points on the same thing, one person bought it for everyone. We were doing the same with techniques, but those were more personal. We didn't have enough points to buy every water or ice technique there was, but we could spring for a few. If someone wanted something rare or outside of that, it was on them, but we at least gave people an option or two. Marcus was also on board, and he was set to buy most of our water techniques, both mana and body. I watched my personal points dwindle as I bought more books. There were a few runes in them, and there were also different runic pathways, nodes, and connections shown, but they were mainly theory and educational. What filigree worked best. What each material did or didn't add to a formation. Knowledge and background that we had been missing. Originally, I'd have spent my last points on specific runes or formations I wanted, but Abigail got me not to. She said since runes and formations were directly important for our faction as a whole, it'd be better to spend faction points on them instead of personal points. Runes weren't the only thing I got to spend faction points on that I personally wanted either. If it was important for the faction, what else could I do? What can I say? It paid to be the leader. Chapter 296, Faction Points. Chris POV. Having watched my purchases add up already, I was giddy to keep the ball rolling. Watching my points dwindle had dampened that, but nothing compared to purchasing new goodies, especially new and shiny goodies that fit my needs perfectly. Sadly, spending the faction points would be a little different. All 592,854,235 points had been allocated for and planned out exactly. There would be no browsing like I had with my personal points. Even knowing I didn't get to window shop, I was still excited. There were a lot more points to spend, and there were some big purchases we were set to make. Getting right to it, I went for the big-ticket item first. It was the one I was most excited about. Abigail and the water affinities had the heart of a river thing, Rachel and the fire people had the eternal flame, but the ice and snow comrades were left with nothing. It was a damn shame, a catastrophe of the highest order. Sure, we had massive amounts of ice mana, and if one went on a quick trip north, the mana would become plentiful and pure, but that wasn't the same. A treasure to call our own, where cold affinities could go and work on laws, bloodlines, mana cultivation, and even rooms for body refining could be set up. The possibilities were endless. I could even go there to recover. With my new bed along with a natural treasure gushing cold mana into the surroundings, it would be perfect. That being the case, we obviously had to remedy that fact, and a cold treasure would do just the trick. Seed of a Millennium Glacier born from the glacier core of millennium-old ice and snow. Once planted in suitable conditions, the seed will grow into a glacier with a portion of its previous core strength. If planted in favorable conditions, the seed will grow into a Millennium Glacier itself. If planted in perfect conditions, the seed will exceed its previous core's strength. Abigail technically cheated and had her assistant go into the reward store early to pick up a book on cold treasures. She then used it to pick the most suitable treasure that we could buy. The glacier was both the best for our own use and the easiest to work with of the many treasures we could buy. Some required strange conditions that we couldn't curate or have ready access to. The glacier seed was one that we could. It would take some effort picking out the right spot, laying down some formations and saturating it with mana, but we were hopeful to at least provide what the system said were favorable conditions. Plus, having a glacier form around the seed was to our advantage. The seed would grow into the new glacier's core and strong. Durable ice would freeze around it. It had its own defense built in. We would obviously add to that, but having that at the get-go was a plus. Maybe I can hollow out a place next to the core for my own use? Ever since reading about it, it was all I could think about. The core provided mountains of ice mana that both flooded the area but also worked to grow the glacier around it, so there was a secondary effect. That ice could be used as material. We weren't sure how viable weapons would be from it, but buildings were certainly a possibility. The treasure was enough to make me swoon, but clicking purchase and watching the points drain remedied that. The bones I debated on so heavily previously didn't hold a candle to how much I just spent. Next up was a list of specific runes that we needed to buy. There were some truly interesting ones on the list that I would 100% be studying on the way home. That and the communication device Tracy gave me were going to be thoroughly broken down. Among those that interested me, weight reduction and spatial enlargement were the ones I was looking at most intently. Of course, we planned to use them for wagons so they could carry more in backpacks, but it was the first step toward spatial rings. Even our points in addition to Marcus's weren't enough for a true spatial ring. The best we could do were spatially expanded backpacks, but why buy one when you could buy the runes? It was more expensive to buy the runes, but making them was much more important. It wasn't guaranteed to be able to reverse engineer a backpack. Honestly, the chance of doing so was rather slim. We had no idea of the construction process or what skills were involved if we bought one at random. For all we knew, the one we purchased could have been crafted by someone with a strong spatial affinity, and it was impossible to do so otherwise, making it impossible to work out. Instead, the base runes would make it so that with some study we'd be able to produce our own. Hopefully. There was also a deluge of other runes for crafting and formations that I purchased. I had the basics already: durability, protection, penetration, and piercing, but these were a wider range of options. Other elemental runes were also on the list. I already had frost and wind, but I bought flame, lightning, acid, water, gravity, and other elemental runes I hadn't already learned. While I expanded the amount of runes we had in our repository, I also purchased stronger ones of those I already knew. Runes followed a similar ranking system as laws, and all the runes I knew were of the basic rank, or Tier 1. Basic runes were Tier 1. Lesser runes were Tier 2. Greater runes were Tier 3. Master runes were Tier 4. Ancient runes were Tier 5. Divine runes were Tier 6. There was also the supposed primordial rune at Tier 7, but nothing I had read indicated that was true, only speculation. Similar to laws, runes lined up with ranks quite smoothly. It was no coincidence that it happened that way. Each rune as it went up in tier grew more and more complex. A basic frost rune was a children's drawing compared to a lesser rune. High-tier runes were something our minds couldn't even comprehend without the required robustness. Increasing evolutionary ranks built that robustness along with other experiences. It wasn't impossible to be able to comprehend a rune above your rank, but it wasn't common. Crafters dedicated to runes could do it with monumental effort or study. There was also the possibility of being predisposed to a rune. My affinity and experiences made me familiar with frost and ice runes already. It made it a lot easier to comprehend those above others. Affinities contributed toward how fast or slow someone comprehended a rune. Instead of thinking each rune had a corresponding rank, it was every rank that allowed access to more complex runes. I wasn't sure how long it was going to take me to learn and be able to carve the more powerful runes, but I would get the hang of it eventually. It would also go a long way towards my profession, both in terms of faster leveling and a better rarity when I evolved. If I managed to start crafting higher tier runes, it would push the rarity of what I could make further. Crafting epic gear wouldn't be out of the picture. After going through and widening how many runes we had knowledge of, next on the list came techniques and skills. Techniques and skills were the backbone of factions, and the rest of our faction points were allocated mostly to them. Delegating most of it for individuals to purchase saved us points, but that didn't mean we were content with that. Abigail was hell-bent on expanding our library, and she was getting her wish. The common affinities got the most love. Nature, fire, earth, ice, lightning, water, wind, metal, light, shadow. We dubbed those the elemental affinities, and they were by far the most common. There were also the advanced or derived versions of those. Nature had wood, plant, forest, jungle, life, growth, and others along those lines. Fire had heat, flame, flare, conflagration, blaze, inferno. Each element had further affinities it could turn into or branch off toward. Also, there were combinations of multiple elements, and those were nearly endless. No one had enough points to buy everything, and trying was a waste of time. Instead, we did what we could to get a firm base in the common ones and left it up to others if they needed something else. Storm affinity was so rare that spending points buying techniques for it using faction points was a waste. It was better to have those with the affinity use their own points and then pay them to share it, either in gold or something else. It also helped that Marcus would be taking on some of the burden. He was buying a great number of water techniques anyway, which made it so we could choose other affinities to work on. Rachel was confident that with some negotiation and the right amount of coin, she would get Vanessa and the Eternal Flame faction to share fire techniques with us as well. I wasn't too knowledgeable about the relationship between Rachel and the other faction, but we decided to trust her to get it done. It helped that we didn't have many fire people in our faction, as they didn't like the cold. If Rachel failed, not that many would be put out. With those two affinities taken care of, we focused on ice, water, and wind mainly. We also dipped into the combination of those as well. Weather, blizzard, Arctic, and snow. We got both body refining techniques and mana cultivation techniques for those affinities. Skills were another we focused on. We could buy skill shards from the alien merchants, but those were a per skill cost, and at a faction level of thousands it was expensive as hell. There was the possibility to buy the skill once and hope the person mastered it well enough to teach the skill to others, but that was insanely difficult. Gabriel spent most of his time researching skills, and even he found a hard time teaching them. You could also write them down into books, but that took a mastery even above teaching. The positive about creating skill books in this way was it didn't depend on the student's learning ability. Skill books worked like skill shards in that all you had to do was use them and the skill would be learned. That didn't mean they were easy to make. Gabriel had ranted about how hard it was often enough that I got the picture. He had yet to make one, let alone enough to supply our faction. Plus, you could only create skill books of skills you knew, which was another limiter. Being taught a skill shards, and skill books weren't the only way to learn new skills, luckily. Other than making them yourself, there were also skill orbs. Skill orbs came in a few different forms, but they weren't one use like skill shards or books. They allowed more than one person to learn the skill. Some were inferior and broke after a certain number of people used them, but there were also those that were rechargeable. Those were the ones we were going after. It would allow us to provide skills to our family and order members indefinitely. Saying infinitely wasn't exactly true because they recharged only so fast, but it was essentially a buy it once and have it forever kind of thing. Obviously, such orbs were expensive as shit, and the specific skill inflated the price by a significant degree. Skill orbs for Power Strike and Penetrating Strike were a lot less expensive than something of higher rarity. Skill orbs also fell into the same boat as techniques, in that purchasing them on the market was insanely hard. It was only through rare dungeon drops that they were put up for sale at all, unlike techniques. Techniques were never dropped unless the dungeon was special. We had to be picky with which skills we chose and were limited to common ones. Anything above that was out of our price range. We could maybe get one or two, but we deemed it better to start low with more than high with few. Now, one might say buying skill orbs for such common skills was a waste of money, and on an individual level they would be right. But this was for our faction. A person only got 6 skills in H rank. From level 1 to 10, you only got 6 in your starting class. New mages or warriors would be able to learn skills from the orbs while also being more choosy with the ones they received from their class. There was also the chance they could upgrade them. My own Mighty Blow, now Meteor Strike, upgraded from the common skill Power Strike. With a wider base and possibly upgrading them to be more personal, their power would rise and higher rarity class evolutions would become easier. That would feed into our faction and create stronger people, pushing things even further. All because of a common skill at the start. More options at the start of the journey would make it easier for them to reach further. The skills I picked up orbs for were a generic set for all the starting classes. Power Strike and Piercing Strike for the warriors and rogues. Power Shot and Piercing Shot for the rangers. Mana Bolt and Mana Shield for the mages. Healing Hands and Body Scan for the healers. After the treasure, runes, techniques, and skill orbs, our faction points were hurting. The last thing on the menu was professions. Beginner profession books for those we didn't already have. We had blacksmith, leatherworker, carpenter, and those like it already, but this was for rarer professions. This was also an area where the alien merchants could help. Information on the more common professions was easier to get, and we would be getting most of the books and starters from them instead of the reward store. But there were a few that weren't so easily bought. The main one being Dungeon Curator. It was long overdue and something we needed urgently. Having a professional curator would make our dungeons grow much faster and remove the risk of them breaking. Including Curator, I bought Artificer, Arcane Engineer, and Golem Smith. Professions specific to magic combined with technology were some of the ones harder to buy as some cultures didn't care for it. Every race had its own disposition and some were ill-inclined for magitech. I wasn't sure how well Golem Smith would go, but Gabriel and Abigail were convinced it was a good choice. They won me over by saying they could make training dummies that we could spar with. In my head, manpower would always be better than golems, but I could see the appeal. Lastly, for profession books, we expanded on Beast Tamer. Beast Handler, Breeder, and Beast Commander would help in expanding that devolvement. I knew we would never have the sheer population of some cities. Hell, New York probably still had millions while we only had tens of thousands. In that case, instead of numbers, we needed quality. Cavalry on strong beasts, whether that be horses, bison, or something else. Hal wanted a griffin eventually, as his bloodline was related to them and being an aerial force. My goal was bears. Bear riders both sounded awesome and would be insanely powerful, but that was getting ahead of ourselves. I could still barely withstand the aura of a bear, let alone tame one. For all of that to come to fruition, we needed a strong base in breeding, rearing, taming, and handling various beasts. By then, our once overflowing faction points were nearing their end. Even delegating some things so they could stretch further could only do so much. With a phantom tear in my eye, I spent the last of our faction points on profession knowledge. Forging styles, alchemy recipes, specific non-runic enchantments, and cooking recipes. We didn't have a lot of points left by then, and these were available through merchants, but it was more efficient to get them here than from somewhere else. Stuff like this was also something Abigail delegated out, but it didn't hurt to go a little further. Knowledge was power after all. After selecting and buying the last of what Abigail had on the list, my eyes glanced at our point totals. Personal points, 0. Faction points, 0. Well, it was fun while it lasted. Chapter 297 Capstone. Chris POV. My points were gone and it was time to return. My mind exited the absurdly white space and my senses returned to the sizable tent we had all been standing in. Around everyone were piles upon piles of boxes, books, materials of all kinds, and more boxes. We were lucky the system provided suitable containers for most things as it had before. The treasure I used to upgrade my affinity came inside a box to contain and preserve it until I was ready to use it, and that seemed to apply to our more expensive purchases. The buildup of aura? It was hard to tell, but it felt like some of the items had their own aura, even if that sounded odd. It wasn't just mana that wrapped densely around them, but a spiritual weight as well. While the intricate wooden boxes may preserve and contain, they didn't silence completely. Anyone with a high sensitivity or moved close by would know something was here. That was fine. We hadn't counted on them being silenced. It would just make things a touch more interesting. The healers had done their job well, and while I wasn't tip-top, I was more than healthy enough to put down any wayward thief or warrior turned bandit. My body may protest, but I could do it. I was even ready to fight factions if it came to that. Marcus and I traveling together would hopefully curb any interest in our stuff, but I kind of wanted it to happen anyway. If they fell to their greed and attacked us, we'd save someone else from falling prey. My thoughts weren't, because I suddenly grew an altruistic bone. If we were attacked, we wouldn't only be ridding the world of scum, but we would also coincidentally be gaining what those who fell to temptation had. A win-win in my book. Abigail was already sorting through the many piles, and I was surprised to learn I wasn't the last one out. I had spent a good amount of time debating between the bones I would get, and I also had a lot more points to spend. The timer was getting low, but I wasn't worried anyone wouldn't make it. They already knew what they were going to buy. They were just being picky. I looked around and contained a hint of a smirk. The pile around me was significantly larger than anyone else, and Austin was sulking about it. Har har, rub it in. One of these days I'll beat you. He snarked from within a considerable pile of his own treasures. I didn't say anything. I looked away innocently but unconvincingly. Instead of poking him more, I turned to the pack rat, making sure everything was all right. How long until we can leave? The healers still weren't through everyone, and it had only been 2 days. But with so much wealth, I didn't want to stay any longer than we had to. We had the builders and carpenters working throughout the night to make as many carts as they could, but we still needed a few days yet. 3 days? I'm not sure, she said. Depends on a lot of things. I nodded and looked at the pile of goodies behind me. All right, 3 or 4 days. I could certainly keep myself busy until then. Hal, work out shifts among who's left. Austin can pitch in if you're light on manpower. Actually, Hal said, now that Sarah is back, her wolves are great for detection. A few men along with the super sniffers will be more than enough. Sarah was allowed south on the condition that she not participate in the heavy fighting. She kept the horses and bison compliant while also herding them across the river when the time came. Surprisingly, she, along with the builders, received personal points for their share. Even smiths, alchemists, and other crafters who only supplied gear and equipment contributed in the eyes of the system. It was rather generous when it wasn't trying to kill us. Whatever you think is enough, double it and I'll be happy, I said. There were things of too much value to me here. We prepare to march in 3 days. Those inside the tent nodded, and I turned back at my rewards. It was a shame I couldn't use many of them right this second, but I would certainly be exploring them soon. There were a few I wished to tear into immediately, but I needed to take care of a few things first. mainly for my peace of mind but also just in case. We had reinforced the camp we had set up and put up defenses lining the outside, but I walked them all the same. I watched for anything out of place or felt for someone approaching. There were people better suited for it, with higher perception and dedicated anti-stealth skills, but I was nervous. Calmed me down to see everything in order. After a quick sweep, and having Hal and Austin do the same, I was comfortable breaking open a few things. The first was the bed. It was the largest of the treasures I bought and stuck out like a sour thumb. It was over 8 feet in length and half that wide. It was also 4 feet tall as well, turning the bed into a large slab. I could feel the energies inside of it and the runes carved into its surface. It wasn't only surface level either, as the engraving ran inside and through certain parts. How they did that without breaking the ice was a mystery, but I gazed at the masterwork all the same. The work done to the ice didn't do a lick to take away from the material. It was only the second time I gazed upon such material. My hammer was made of the only other time. The bed itself called to me and I knew what I would be doing. I took the bed, which was much heavier than I thought it would be, and replaced the one I already had in my tent. I was unsure if it required skin-to-skin contact, but after a few tests, I learned it didn't much matter. Whether I was clothed, lying on fur bedding, or bareback straight to the ice, it all felt the same. Fur and cloth did nothing to stop the treasure from working. Satisfied, I laid down and kept my senses alert for thieves. I had never once been so concerned, but the urge wouldn't fully go away. While cold meditation would have made me recover faster, I instead started playing with aura detection while lying down. The bed did its work and I felt my vitality thundering through my body, but I kept my attention on my new skill. The skill itself was marvelous. I had already practiced detecting things with my aura, but the skill was so much more. It took things to an even higher level, and its rare tag was not unfounded. It was like gaining a tactile response when only having vague feelings before. If I focused hard enough on an object, I could identify it through aura alone. I knew that was how the skill worked, but it was exciting to see it in action. All the practice with Gabriel helped me get used to the skill quickly. My aura spread out liberally throughout the camp and I was ready for anything. It was much larger than before and the levels bringing me to the cap only added to that. Oh shit! The rewards distracted me from my last skill. With so much happening, I had totally forgotten I had hit the last threshold for my class. The last of my 6 skills. Felt less exciting than before. I'd just come out like a bandit and somehow picking my last skill didn't seem as important. I'll need time to reconsider all my options, especially with Frostbound upgrading and making Jotun armor not as interesting. My level 90 skill was a 3-way decision between Frozen Leech, Icy Connection, and Jotun armor. One would think since I already picked Frozen Leech and armor wasn't as vital now, only one option would be left, but that wasn't true. My last selection broadened my options and there were a few more to choose from now. It was disappointing that I wouldn't be filling out my hammer, but I'd figure that out eventually. I'd find out all the skills involved and not just be stuck with Shattering Hammer and Frozen Rift. How I did that, I wasn't sure, but such powerful skills were something I had a lot of interest figuring out. So far, Hammer of the Jotun had given me my beloved hammer. Frostbound hammer at level 50. Then it gave me a violent attack skill, Shattering Hammer at 60. After that, a robust defense skill, Jotun's Resistance at 70. Another attack skill at 80, but with some utility as well in Frozen Rift. The ice it created could be used for more than just attacking, even if it was what I used it for most. Then, Frozen Leech at 90, which to be honest, I hadn't explored the depths of yet. I'd used it on the war leader, but I wasn't sure how much it did during the fight. I hadn't been paying much attention to which was working faster, my fists or the skill. Now, at the cap, the last skill awaited and I had to change up how I thought about it. Icy Connection didn't sound as good now as it did back then. It sounded like a skill any ice class would gain, not that such a thing was bad. But this was Hammer of the Jotner, I wanted my last skill to matter. Plus, I knew which kind of class awaited me next. I'd put it off for long enough and my D-rank class wouldn't be as offense-heavy as the one I had now. Leadership wasn't something I could keep running away from. Not if I wanted to keep being one. Going off on my lonesome was an option, but not one I considered for long. I liked my home. The place I had built, I wasn't about to leave it now. That being the case, and with the knowledge of what skills awaited such a class, maybe it was better to finish out E rank strong. Jonathan has stone empowerment, and there's bound to be an ice version of the skill. With some upgrades and guided development, it could turn into something like icy connection. Every step further with my law also brought me closer to my ice. It wasn't like that skill was the only way to do it. A leadership class should have some hefty defense skills. Should I go all in with another attack skill? Lying on the bed worked wonders throughout my body, and without even noticing it, also on my mind. The relaxation it provided and the soothing effect made it feel like a spa. If it wasn't for the occasional flare-up of my vitality fighting away at the blight and fixing my wounds, it would have felt like exactly that. My stats are monstrous, my hammer strong, and my defense unbelievable. Jotun's resistance plus glacial heavy plate saw me through mountains of orcs. Defense should be fine. But with Mighty Blow becoming epic along with Shattering Hammer and Frozen Rift, do I really need another way to crush my foes? There was a lot to think about. Shoring up weaknesses and gaining a lot of treasure so fast made my final skill much harder to choose than before. All my skills are limited in the same way. Meteor Strike, Shattering Hammer, and Frozen Rift all rely on me hitting them with my hammer. As such, hordes work against me. My wintry domain helps, it kills off anything too weak, but as seen by the demons and orcs, that isn't always enough. My endurance, fortitude, and spirit kept me swinging, but that wasn't fast enough. If I could slaughter quicker, more people would have survived. That wasn't guilt talking, but just a statement of fact. That being the case, my gaze turned toward two specific skills. Both legendary and both equally adept at capping a brilliant class. Jotun Battle Roar, legendary. The Jotner thrive in lands of ice and snow and have learned to both turn the battlefield wintry, but also use that against their foe. Using that connection and stimulating the area around the user with their voice, any ice, snow, or frost turns into a barrage of attacks blanketing the area. The stronger the ice and the colder the air, the stronger the attack. Mana and stamina costs depend on the size of the area affected and the force of the attack. Hammer Reverberation, legendary. Hammers carry monumental force in the hands of the right wielder, but sometimes that force is wasted. Instead of using such force to kill one thing so utterly, spread it out over many. This skill can be used on its own, or in conjunction with other skills. Spreads the effect of paired skills, if any, over a larger area while also weakening it. Mana or stamina cost depends on skills used. Chapter 298, Oblivious. Chris POV. Hammer Reverberation. The decision wasn't that hard. While Jotun Battle Roar sounded amazing and wildly powerful, Hammer Reverberation was more versatile. There was a certain amount of build-up that Battle Roar required that the other skill didn't. The perquisite that there already be ice and snow present was also a drawback. Sure, that was usually a given when I fought using my skills, but there was also the issue of repeated use. Did Battle Roar shatter everything and make it unusable? If that was the case, then there was also a build-up time to consider in between uses. Plus, the effect was something I hoped to achieve manually. It would take a lot of work and training, but it was something I could see myself figuring out without the skill. That couldn't be said for Hammer Reverberation. Losing my hammer was a real worry, but it wasn't enough to deter me. Being able to use just plain stats was too much to let go of. Pure, physical strength while using the skill was something I couldn't wait to test out. One without any boost, then one with all of them. That would be something. With my last choice made, my class was officially finished. If I wasn't superstitious, I could open the options for my next one, but I still wasn't sure if that was a good idea. Intellectually, I knew that looking ahead of time probably didn't do anything, but I didn't want to take the risk. Not for my class. It was too important. After my choice, I laid back down and got back to aura detection. The bed was mighty comfortable, and after lying on it for only a few moments, I didn't want to leave. I felt the entire camp through the skill. I couldn't focus everywhere in great detail, which was a shame. I could go wide and fuzzy or narrow and clear, but hoped to rid that weakness over time. I'd only just started getting used to it after all. Austin and Hal were both out and about walking the perimeter. The other scouts were with them doing routes of their own. Sarah's wolves were with some of them, sniffing around making sure no one got close. Overkill, maybe, but sufficient to ease my worry. After feeling the barest hints of the glacier seed, not even opening the box but what leaked through, I'd defend it with my life. I was starting to understand the feeling Abigail and Marcus were talking about. I couldn't wait until we got back and planted it. The days, while tense, went by without a hitch. There were a few rats we had to drive off and even one we had to kill who got a little too nosy, but it was mainly quiet. The few who tried were all rogues looking to nick something fast and easy. It comforted me that the scouts found them. The wolves caught wind of them, and I felt them with aura detection. Either these were amateurs who were terrible at stealth, or we had a decent thing going. I elected to believe the former. I knew people with strange abilities out there existed, and it was bad to assume we could catch them all. After the first wayward soul came to our camp, I moved the seed, my bones, and a few other choice things into my tent. The rest were guarded heavily, but I wanted to keep an eye on those things personally. Abigail practically slept on a bed of books. She was so afraid of them getting stolen. She even debated asking me to put down a formation even though we had neither the time nor the resources. I declined to tell her I also didn't have the know-how. Oh, I could have learned now that we had so many new books, but not in the time we had left. It wasn't just us that were worried. Everyone kept a better eye on the surroundings. The new purchases were burning everyone's consciousness. The builders of both our faction and Marcus's did quick work, and they were ready even before our 3-day deadline. Sarah got the horses and bison in line, and by the morning of day 5 after the test, we were ready to go back home. Other factions took off before us, but I wasn't worried about that. The most notable thing during the wait was what the merchants did. Every group of what I learned were all the different companies picked a faction to set up shop in. I knew that much already, but it was what they did after that was eye-catching. All of them were making a journey of some kind, and none of them had arrived with a way to do so. People were the only thing that came through the obelisk. No carts, no horses, nothing besides the people. In the time it took the factions they were now connected to get ready, they themselves worked on modes of transportation. The Frost Rose Emporium, which I watched the closest, had the dwarf work up a cart that was both sturdier and fancier in a lot less time. Put what we could do to shame. After throwing together a cart for the merchants and himself to ride in, a different one, the elf, waved his hand, spent a ludicrous amount of mana, and 2 glistening white horses appeared to pull it. It was mind-blowing. I had assumed the horses were real at first, and that contributed to my wonder, but we later learned that they were simply summoned phantoms. Or spirits. That part wasn't quite clear, but the main point was they weren't real. They were a skill the merchant had, and when asked about it the elf only said, "A merchant always has use for a steed." The cart and new horses weren't the only thing the merchants were up to. I'd felt the shift in mana in the air around them during the second night. It was so large everyone could. We tensed up and were worried at first, but it wasn't long before we figured out what was happening. When they first arrived, my identify was too weak to work on them, but after gaining aura detection, I saw that they were all level 100. It didn't take much skill in deduction to figure out they had evolved. It did raise some alarm, and there were a great many questions to be asked, but I wasn't all that worried about them. While they appeared stronger to my senses, especially the guards, they were still far from enough to worry me. If the guards from every company of merchants got together and fought my faction alone, then I'd tense, but with only one company and less than half a dozen guards, not so much. Of the 5 newly minted D-rank guards, I felt I could take them all. Hell, most of my family could. Abigail had surprised me during the test. I hadn't thought she had that in her, but that shows how much I underestimated her. Assuming the city leader with her hand in a little of everything didn't have time for training was going to get someone killed later, of that I was sure of. They'd look at her and see a mayor, not a warrior. Then they'd be dead before they could make the mistake again. Abigail, Rachel, Austin, Hal, and Jonathan were all people I felt could take the new guards. Maybe even Carrie too. Her skills were more toward carpet bombing a wide area, but I felt she had some fight in her. The thing that excited me most was I could still see their level. Identify had trouble with anything above my level, not even mentioning a rank above me, but aura detection didn't have that problem. Even after they evolved, I could see their level. The skill made me smile as I was finally not useless in that regard. Admittedly, it wasn't the most in-depth scan, and all I got was a level and a rough estimation of power through comparison, but it was better than question marks. Anything was better than question marks. Other than that small surprise along with the few would-be thieves, there was nothing else of note. We came, we saw, and we conquered, and now we were heading home. My deals with other factions were finished. Our alliance with Marcus was strengthened, and we had foreign merchants along for the ride. The first few days of the trip were nostalgic of the last time we did it, but, just like the previous time, the days got boring fast. For the first week, night shifts were doubled and everyone was still alert, but our worry was unfounded. Either other people were chosen as prey or people were more worried about securing their own prize. Either way, we made it out fine. Austin was rather disappointed. He'd bet Hal that there would be a fight and was not too pleased to be proven wrong. Hal rubbing it in didn't help. After putting a generous amount of distance between us and the obelisk, things calmed down. I stopped using aura detection so religiously and people settled in. Having my aura spread out over the whole group day and night was wearing on me. Letting it billow out naturally didn't cost anything and was rather pleasing, but using it to constantly scan the surroundings caused a mental aching after a while. Even Abigail stopped fretting as much. New books were broken open and purchase skills were practiced as we went. All in all, it was a rather good time. Her beloved winds were more active than ever. The paltry few she had recruited to join her were proving their worth with every passing moment. The gathering was rife with opportunities and she made sure they were exploited. Formations that looked interesting were written down to be studied. Skills that alerted people to their presence were discovered. Technology secrets that were attempted to be kept hidden unveiled. Her order, as the humor in naming it after what had already emerged wasn't lost on her, did thankless work. The one rule she set for all her followers was to never be discovered. That included recognition for deeds done. The less who knew, the better. Her profession sang to her and it was finally time to push it to the fullest. There was only so much she could do without people working against her. A game of chess wasn't the same without an adversary. After dealing with those who did not belong, it was a long time until more arrived. Nearly a year even. Ashton, the capitulator. His efforts did not go unnoticed with infiltrators, but it was better to leave them guessing than to kill them off completely. If no news got out, then it would become a curiosity. Better to control what did rather than clamp down on everything. Lull them into complacency. With so many people for her wins to watch, it was the first time in a long time her efforts were strained. Even after the rough battle, there were those looking to strike. The dishonorable curs. When her profession finally capped after such intense use lately, she peeked at what was next. She didn't believe in the superstition, and it was always better to know now rather than to put off. The options were tantalizing, but she couldn't go through with it now. It was too soon. Too much attention would be drawn. It was a good thing the merchants alerted her to that particular issue. She hadn't known it would cause such a disturbance. The winds whispered in her ear of lurkers in the dark, but no matter how many times they drew near, they never did attack. Something spooked them. Something set them off, and even if the leader of such a band of bandits wasn't the brightest bulb, they still knew attacking was certain death. They had even set up an ambush directly on their path but still failed to gather the courage. She knew the reason for their fear. Everyone had felt the subtle chill wrapping around them lately. The nip was offset by the warming comfort it brought, like being wrapped tight in a blanket on a winter's day. While it may have felt that way to allies, it was an entirely different feeling to foes. It was the chill before death. The promise to slowly feel your body shut down before going to sleep for the final time. A slow and painful end. There was no comfort to be found, only desolate cold. A cold that even with its owner oblivious, lit the way forward, warding away those who lurked in the dark. It was almost poetic, to have something so steeped in ice and death used in such a way. To ward off hyenas while the lamp remained none the wiser such vultures were even there. It was enough to make the woman smile. Chapter 299, Fresh Air. Anything regarding the spirit or its advancement has always been shrouded in mystery. For as long and as far back as recorded history spans, spirit advancements and what is now known as the path of power through the spirit has laughed in the face of any codification. It has bucked convention, spit in the face of comparison, and all around undermined any attempts to regulate the process or its effects. The other paths, body and mind, can both be distilled down and systemized quite easily. Laws of the universe can be understood through meditation or enlightenment. A lesser law of one aspect is generally the same as a lesser law of another. While there are nuances in that comparison, they are not nearly as nebulous as the spirit. Body is even simpler, if only more convoluted because of its two halves. Each mana core, heart, or other construct can be strictly evaluated and compared with any other. Body levels as well. Unlike spirit, where each step one makes is inherently not equal to another. Another difference about the spirit that sets it apart from the others is the rank requirement to advance upon it. Comprehension of higher-tier laws requires a suitable mind to handle it. To peel back the veil of the universe and gaze upon its inner workings isn't something lowly F-ranks can do so easily. Tier 1 laws are considered least for a reason, or else no one lower than D rank would be able to comprehend them. Each ascending rank can peel back further, look deeper, and comprehend more. For every rank, there is a general limit for how far one can go for every path. Tier 1 laws, body of wood, and first step mana are generally as far as F rank can go. It should be noted that the system aids those who have only done one of the above-mentioned three with their evolutions. As one evolves further, that general limit expands. Tier 2 laws, body of stone, and second step mana for E rank. Tier 3 laws, body of copper, and third step mana for D rank. That limit isn't ironclad, and there has been exceptions by various outstanding individuals. Tier 3 laws in E rank are not unheard of nor having a body of copper. It takes great effort, time, and dedication to break those rules and become an exception, but it can be done. That does not apply to the spirit. There are no limits or exceptions. While unheard of and never occurred in written history, an F-rank being could, theoretically, advance their spirit indefinitely. It does not take a robust mind that only further evolutions will give. It does not take a nourished body or cultivated mana through the accumulation of essence. Advancing the spirit relies entirely on the internal, with no use for external comprehension, essence, or mana. Theory stipulates that because of that lack of external need, it advances regardless of rank since it does not rely on what further evolutions can give. While that sounds great, and many young hopefuls jump at the idea of advancing their spirit far along the path to becoming a powerhouse for their rank and level, it is very rarely accomplished. It is considered the hardest path for a reason, and a great many never set foot upon it. Most who do manage it never take another. Each step has no guidelines. There are no tiers or levels. It can be written about endlessly and has been, by those who've explored its depths. But those accounts can only provide examples, never guidance. Such personal and individual expressions are always unique. That being said, one thing can be summarized from all the various accounts. There is a reason it begins with an anchor. Excerpt from The Paths of Power by Grixie Manaborn. Chris. The book snapped shut as my name was being called. Days passed quickly as we traveled, and it allowed time to finally sit and explore. I'd spent a lot of time on the message Stone Tracy gave me along with the communication formation from Fitz Wallace. Both were novel and an expression and application of runes I hadn't thought of. My main focus was always on power when it came to runes, not finesse. How to make the strongest ward, how to make the strongest weapon. Which configuration of runes would make what I was creating both strong and durable. That experience didn't apply to communication. Sure, there were ways to make the device itself stronger, but that didn't help the function at all. The strength of the crystal didn't affect how far or fast it could send messages. It took days to figure out how my thought process was wrong, but even after gaining that enlightenment, I was no closer to creating one of my own. The way I drew runes was inherently different from how the person who made the messaging stone drew them. I was so focused on the augmentation of the material that it was all I could see. The stone didn't work that way. The runes carved into it didn't augment the stone or change its properties, but the mana that flowed through it. If any of my past experience was of use, it was my familiarity with the frost rune. The way it changed the mana from one affinity to another. That wasn't even close to what the stone was doing, but it was similar in that all of the runes strung together were focused on the mana, rather than the material. In my frustration, I gave it time to settle and explore other things. That being the advancement of what was considered the paths of power. We knew generally how it was done from the tutorial, but that wasn't enough for Abigail. She wanted, in exacting detail, how every step was made. While I spent points on formation and rune knowledge, she bought up books on further advancement. Jonathan and I had both formed our anchors long ago and were left in the dark about how to go from there. Now that Austin had done it, there were 3 of us that were now stuck. I wasn't sure if Abigail purchased the book more for me or Jonathan, but both of us were grateful for it, even if it wasn't very helpful. Chris must be important then. I managed to finagle my bed to a cart that I had Icebreaker pulling. The gifted bison pushed on like he didn't even feel the weight of so much ice. Lying upon it made me not want to get up, but if they were calling me twice, it was necessary. I hopped out of the cart and meandered my way towards where I was being called. "Yes, my dear sister," I snarked. After resting and lying on the bed, I was fit as a fiddle. I didn't need to continue lying on it, but it was comfortable. "The detachment has come back," Abigail informed and pointed toward where a small grouping of carts wheeled back toward us. "So they have," I said, looking at all the food. We had run low and I was starving for a good meal. My mouth was salivating just thinking about it. Did they have any trouble? Elliot was heading the detachment, so I trusted him to protect them if things went wrong. The City of Storms was deemed the better option of the 2 cities to resupply. That being the case, we delegated a small team to the resupplying effort. I didn't want to go and cause a scene, and Abigail was more than happy with my desire to stay away. "No problems," she said. "They said he hasn't even made it back yet." How did we beat him to his own city? Did he run into problems?" "Well, that's great news," I said. "That means we won't have any further trouble." The visit to resupply was the last hitch on our way back. Could have gone a lot worse, but the fact he wasn't even there made it all the easier to get in and out without issues. Abigail's face constricted slightly. "Are you sure you wish to stay?" "Oh, this again." "Yes, I'm sure. Someone has to keep the ice frozen and make sure the wounded stay safe," I said. "And the treasure." She geared up to combat me, but I raised my hand. "I'm not changing my mind on this, Abigail." "Fine," she huffed. "Then I will see you when you get back." I was surprised. "You're leaving now?" I thought she'd wait another day or so at least. "As soon as we pack the necessary food." She nodded at the carts bursting with the stuff. That was the last thing they were waiting on before they broke away from the rest of us. Abigail was antsy being away for so long. The trip south took nearly 3 months, and we were only a few more on our way back. She was not thrilled to be away from her children for so long, and neither was Jonathan. I suspected she was also rearing to get back and check on everything, but Anna and Josh were her main worries. That being the case, along with a few other parents of young children, they were setting off ahead with less luggage. They hoped to double-time it back with lighter loads. Now that we were out of ambush range and far enough north a skirmish was unlikely, they were due to set off. The discussion of who was leaving early was rather heated. Some said to bring the most valuable treasures with us while we book it back, but I didn't wish to leave. Sure, I could sprint home as fast as possible to get smithing and evolve, but I didn't want to do that. This was a rare chance to sit back and catch up on the things I'd been putting off. I knew a storm was brewing and it would eventually come to pass, but I had time before it broke. Time to let things settle and cool off rather than keep pushing full steam ahead. After what we'd just gone through, I needed to spend some time alone. I'd caught myself yelling and anger getting the better of me more often. Now that it had such an effect on others, it was much more noticeable. I didn't like their pale faces or shaking hands. It made me feel out of control. According to Gabriel, our aura was an extension of us, and if that was causing people to fear me, something was wrong. Fresh air and a nice, long, relaxing trip back was what I wanted. Spending every moment rushing for levels to evolve would only worsen the problem. At least I thought so. Austin was hounding Ashley and the other healers every chance he had to fix up his arm. Even though they told him his healing limit had been reached, he still insisted. Healing his arm was the only thing stopping him from evolving. He had his laws at Tier 2, his body at stone, and his anchor formed. He was also capped in both class and profession. I wouldn't be surprised if the second Ashley said he was fixed, he'd evolve right then and there. "Then I will see you when I get home," I said. With a hug to Abigail and a nod to Jonathan, they set off. I wasn't surprised to see the merchants going with them. Those conjured horses of theirs could keep up with us easily. I'd yet to see them tire. I wasn't worried about what they would do. Both Jonathan and Abigail could handle themselves. Honestly, them fighting together was something I wished to see. Other than Abigail and Jonathan, only Rachel left with them. She was eager to go see her husband, as Braden had stayed behind in Frostheim. Hal wished to stay with the main group and his order. Ashley didn't want to leave the wounded and Austin didn't want to leave Ashley. Because Austin was staying, his mother did as well. Mitchell spent all his time next to Allison. His eyes barely left the icy coffin and no one had the heart to ask him to. Gabriel didn't want to leave his books, which were staying, and my mother stayed with him. Our arrivals wouldn't be that far apart, but some felt the urge to hurry home and I wasn't going to tell them not to. The twins were only a few months away by this point and Frostheim would come soon after. Chapter 300 Why Sad? The initial forging of the mana core is always the most strenuous and difficult of the process. Inexperience and ignorance play a major role in that distinction. While the next steps take more mastery and continually raise the bar for performative execution, the experience gained allays some of that. Constructing or forging your first circle or star, depending on how you refer to it, is harder but not in the same way the initial forging is. To forge a mana core, one must handle the mountain of mana inside one's pool, while also supplementing more from outside, in addition to managing the regeneration one naturally produces. It takes the skill of manipulating all the mana in your body and more, while also not letting anything slip. The sheer amount needed to keep under control is what stops many from making that first step, especially in the early ranks where their manipulation is sloppy at best. Since you are reading this, then that means you've already taken it and know of the process. Now, after gaining entry onto the path, you must make your next step. That step is different for many techniques, but it can be generalized for most by forging your first circle. Then, you will join the ranks of first circle mages. While confusing at first to reference the second step as the first circle, you can gain clarity by considering the core the initial phase or the foundation. Something must be built first before it can be added on to. Generally, the first circle is forged when the practitioner is in the E rank. If completed, it will allow them to retain the system's aid during the evolution. Unlike laws, which takes a certain mental willpower and stout persistence of the mind, mana cultivation belongs to the body path and does not rely on evolutions. It is completely dependent on essence or, in simpler terms, stat points. The amount of essence in what are considered the magical stats determines when, or if, a circle can be forged. Generally, the first forging should take place when at least one magical stat is above 250. Now, as an approximation, there is some variance for different races. Not every race processes essence equally for every attribute. Additionally, that variance can change based on mastery and skill with mana manipulation, but as a rule of thumb, 250 is the threshold. Our Magic Tower does extensive studies into the standard deviation and variance of the different races, and the conclusions are quite fascinating. If you ever have the time to explore the Myriad Library, I implore you to look into them. For the first circle, 1,000 stat points are recommended. Skill with manipulating mana can lower that threshold along with other circumstances, but for this generalized text, and without getting into the mathematics, 1,000 is the threshold. The second circle, 3,000. The third, 10,000. Above that can be found in further texts. Underscore excerpt from Mana Cultivation and Circles 1 to 3 by Master Arcanist Lei Win. For first-year Magic Tower students. Abigail POV. With so many new books to read, it felt like there wasn't enough time in the day to read them all. She knew that she didn't need to read all of them right at that moment, but she couldn't help it. The knowledge was right there at her fingertips. It was torture to not at least skim them for pertinent information. Like the one she was just reading. Previously, they were only told that further body refinings or mana steps were determined by rank. According to what she just read, that wasn't true. It was determined by stat points, or more importantly, essence level. From her previous studies and knowledge on the subject, every stat point took a certain amount of essence. That essence was gathered mainly from slaying monsters and then processed by the system or manually, but no one had figured that out yet, and put towards raising a person's capabilities. This was the first she was hearing about certain thresholds, a certain number of stats unlocked. Austin and Gabriel had both expected something to come out of reaching 1,000 stat points in a single attribute, and when nothing had, they were both disappointed. They would be happy to learn that something did come out of reaching that threshold, only it wasn't done automatically. Reaching that height only allowed the opportunity, not handed out freely. Everything came down to personal ability and effort, it seemed. It was weird that further advancements in mana were unlocked when one stat reached 1,000. If the amount of essence was the determining factor, why did it matter if that seemingly arbitrary value was reached? What if only wisdom hit it but both intelligence and acumen were barely above 200? Or, comparatively, if all three were just under 1,000 at 900? One was a total of 1,400 points and the other was 2,700. Did one stat hitting 1,000 mean more than having three under that amount? Did the essence change when it hit a certain amount? For every new book or technique Abigail read, there were only more questions that popped up. Instead of everything getting easier to understand with further study, it was getting more complex. And none of it made sense. "Honey, we're nearly there." Her husband shook her from her thoughts. The trip was boring. Easier and faster than before, but boring all the same. At least this time they didn't have to worry about running into strong beasts during the journey. They were strong enough to ignore many of the things they encountered and most ran away from them. Abigail, John, and Rachel added to make quite the disturbance through the woods they passed if they aimed to. The merchants did something as well, but she wasn't sure what. It was like they had beast repellent or something. Another new skill? Her mind whirled with more questions, but she shut it off before she got distracted. John was right, they were reaching the outskirts of Marcus's city already. 3 months since the test, and they were only just getting to the twins now. It would be another month and a half at their current speed before they made it back. Her heart yearned to see her babies, and it hurt to be away for so long. If they ran into any delays, they wouldn't make it back in time for Joshua's birthday. That was unacceptable, and she drove everyone at a fervent pace to make it back in time. They even traveled through the night for a few hours to make it. Abigail knew they were pushing hard, but she couldn't help it. Even the thought of advancing her mana didn't stop her. There would always be time to come back to the treasure to forge her first circle. It wasn't worth missing her son's birthday to stop for a few months. It would delay her evolution, as she didn't want to go through with it if there was still something she could achieve. She wasn't as lucky as Chris to gain a legendary class, but she at least hoped to keep her rare one. Especially because everything would be demoted soon. The evolution to D rank was the first time it would happen, but it wouldn't be the last. The first few ranks being so close in level made it similar enough that a demotion wasn't necessary. A rare skill at level 20 was still considered a rare skill at level 90. Albeit on the lower end, but still of the same rarity. That was not the case for levels past 100. A rare skill gained back in F rank was not the same as a rare skill gained in D rank. Nor was an epic then equal to an epic now. Every skill would be demoted. While her water whip may be considered rare in power now, it would soon only be considered uncommon. Or her water manipulation. Her skill manipulating the liquid may be epic for her current rank, it would only be considered rare for her next one. This demotion happened a few times as one rose through the ranks. D and C rank were close enough that it didn't happen again so soon, but it did when evolving to B rank. After that, it came every evolution. Every further rank was so different in power that what was once above average strength, uncommon or rare, was only considered common. Intellectually and logically, she knew that a powerhouse of a skill at E rank, either epic or legendary, was doubtful to be considered the same in C rank or B rank. It was said people at those ranks could literally fly, let alone have skills so much greater than what they had now. Abigail had only just upgraded her water manipulation to epic. She didn't want to see it drop back down so soon, even if it did remain the same in power. The walls of Twin City came into view over the horizon, and she called out to her retinue. We stop for a day, no more. Resupply quickly and gather what you need. We leave in the morning. The horses were nearly spent and needed a few more days. But that wasn't in the cards. They'd have the rest of the day and the night to catch their breath. Then they would push on. I wonder if our messenger has arrived back home yet? We sent him off right away on the fastest horse after all. Anna POV. Annabeth was bored. Extremely bored. Her mom and dad had both left her, and even Uncle Topher and Gabe did too. Without them, there was nothing to do. She would never admit this, but she had cried after they were gone. Yes, she was a big girl now and was now 11, but that didn't change the fact she missed her parents. Sure, Aunt Sam, Uncle Braden, Uncle Vincent, and Uncle Connor were still here, but they weren't the same. Plus, most of them were too busy to play with her. Vincent spent most of his time in the stuffy fire room. It was way too hot in there. Connor was busy with his new friend and Braden was busy too. At least Lily was here. It would have been torture having only Ma to talk to. Well, Ma and Josh, but he was annoying. She had other friends from school, but they couldn't come over all the time. Even Aurora was getting on her nerves. The puppy had not been pleased at Sarah's absence. Anna had to beg to let her stay and promised to watch her. Walking her and playing with her got old, too. There were only so many times exploring the castle was fun, and she had reached that point months ago. She wished they would come home soon. It was during one of Aurora's walks that something new happened. Hung! The watchtower blew the horn. What's happening? Are they back? Anna couldn't help herself and took off toward the tower. She knew her mom would be upset and tell her to stay inside the castle. But Annabeth truly couldn't help it. Connor and his new friend came out at the sound too, though his friend stayed behind inside the doorway. Hung! Another one. Anna didn't spend a lot of time with the guards, but she'd poked her head into the barracks a few times already. What do 2 blows mean? She'd forgotten what each blow meant. 1 for beast, 2 for friend, 3 for attack. It went something like that, but she was forgetting some of it. There were other rules that were hard to remember. Something about pitch and tone. Even length of the horn blast had a rule. Anna and Connor waited for the 3rd blow, but it never came. Friend. The gates swung open and a lone man on a horse came galloping into the city. She tried to peek through the growing crowd, but it didn't take long for the messenger to continue toward the inner wall. By then, Braden and Sam had come out to join them. The messenger came all the way up to the gate and handed Sam the letter. It was torn open faster than Anna could see, and she tried to get close enough to see it, jumping on her tippy toes. Her aunt took a few moments to read through it and broke down crying. Why is she crying? Is someone not coming back again? Braden quickly grabbed up the letter and read it himself, but his reaction was totally different. He sighed in relief but looked sad the next moment. That was weird. Connor and Vincent were next, and both had similar gloomy expressions. Connor's friend wasn't given the letter to read. Anna, why don't you run and give this to Ma? Connor said, finally handing her the letter. Quickly now. She knew she wasn't supposed to open it, but how was she not going to? It was in her hands. Dear Sam and family, we were met by thousands of people. Blah 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 stuff Anna didn't care about. We are returning home now and should arrive by the end of the year. Some of us are planning to rush back with all haste and should return by mid-November, weather permitting. Aha! November was only 2 months away. Well, September was nearly over, so that really only meant 1 month. Anna was so excited she didn't even read the rest of it. It was all the boring stuff about different people they met or factions they talked to. What did she care about all that? Skipping happily, she zoomed through the castle in search of Ma. She usually tended the garden they set up this time of day, but she didn't do that anymore. Not after fall started. Ma! Anna shouted after finally finding her. She looked old, like she did before but different. What's this, sweetie? She smiled at Anna, running up to her. A letter arrived from Mom. Anna shouted and thrust it out in front of her proudly. Ma took it much like Sam had, snatching it up faster than Anna could watch. Her eyes darted around the paper and she huffed out a sad sigh. Having stood up after Anna ran in, she sat down listlessly after reading and tears welled up in her eyes. She looked even older now. Why is everyone so sad? They're coming back soon. End of chapter 300.